So thank you to all of you. Welcome and thank you to all of you for attending. My name, as I mentioned before, is Laura Enklad. I work for the State Board of Education as the Director of Policy and Research. I'm also joined by another State Board staff member who you'll get to hear from in a few minutes, Spencer Glossick, who's our research assistant, and many of you, particularly those of you working for Ed Prep programs, I know have been in contact with him through the data submission process for this year's report card. And we're also joined today by Amy Wooten from the Tennessee Department of Education, who's the Executive Director of Preparation and Licensure. So you may hear her voice chiming in from time to time. But once again, we just appreciate all of you making time out of your busy summer schedules to attend this webinar. Our plan is to conduct several of these webinars throughout the rest of the summer and the spring. We're really excited about the work that is underway to redesign the teacher preparation report card and want to make sure that we're sharing frequent updates with a variety of stakeholders about where we are in the process, as well as identifying several key places where we want to solicit more feedback from those of you who are attending and listening in on these webinars about your suggestions and thoughts to kind of particular questions that we raise where we'd like to gather some feedback. Because of the number of individuals that we have joining the call today and because of just the amount of content that we'd like to get through in the next little bit, we're going to ask individuals to hold any comments or questions that they have on the line. At the end of the webinar, we're going to share some contact information where if you've got suggestions, feedback, or just general questions that you'd like to submit, we would be more than happy to connect with you on those either via email or over the phone. And so we'll share that contact information at the end, and please feel free to reach out.
Elizabeth, she gave us this other stuff.
If you have not yet muted your line, if you wouldn't mind going ahead and doing that, we would greatly appreciate it. So a little bit about what we'll cover on this webinar. So first we're going to be starting with a little bit of background about the teacher preparation report card, and I'll talk a little bit about why we want to start with background in just a second. We'll also review the focus group and survey feedback that we received, and we'll talk a little bit about our process, both that we conducted this spring as well as what we plan to do ongoing to collect feedback. And then we'll get into kind of the meat of the webinar where we'll talk about our goals for the 2016 report card, and we'll preview for you kind of a sample of the new direction that we're headed in to get your feedback, as well as some of the particular data pieces that we hope to include in this year's report card. So as I mentioned, we wanted to start out with a little bit of background because one of our key goals in this process to redesign the teacher preparation report card is to expand the audience. So on this webinar, we have invited a variety of different stakeholders to join today. So we have not only representatives from educator preparation programs who obviously have a large stake in the development and redesign of this report card, as the report card reports on the effectiveness of their programs. We also have districts who we've invited to this webinar today, so we sent out a notification to several different listservs containing district representatives, including the human resources listserv that we have for all districts. And then we've also sent out this information to several different prospective candidates, so we've been able to gather some data, actually I should say current candidates. We've been able to gather some information through our focus groups from some of the current candidates that are enrolled in educator preparation programs, and we think that they're a key audience in this work. And then finally, we also have some representatives from a variety of different advocacy and statewide education organizations that are joining us today. So we want to start out with a little bit of background just to make sure that everyone has the same kind of context for the conversation today. So here on this slide you can see some information from Tennessee Code Annotated regarding the development of the teacher preparation report card. So as you can see here, the requirement to produce a report card outlining the effectiveness of teacher training programs comes from statute. We also have a couple of key elements that statute calls for the report card to include. So you can see on this slide that the report card is required to include placement and retention rates. It's required to include candidate performance information on practice exams or any other tests that are used to identify preparedness. And then finally, it's also required to include teacher effect data and, in particular, TBOS data. A little bit about the history of this report card. So the legislation that we just reviewed was passed in 2007, which mandated the creation of the report card. The first version of the report card was produced in 2008, and so in 2008 and 2009, it was produced by the State Board of Education. Then in 2010, the transition to the Tennessee Higher Education Commission occurred for them to begin producing the report card. And that transition happened in conjunction with some funding through the state's Race to the Top grant to be able to expand the amount of data and performance information that was available to ed prep programs about their completers. So THAC continued to produce the report card from 2010 through 2014. And then last year, as many of you know, particularly the ed prep programs on the line, the report card transitioned back to the state board for production last year. So last year, THAC completed the data collection process, and then the actual data was analyzed and the report was produced by the state board. And the reason that Amy Wooten is here with us is that we work really closely with the Department of Ed to be able to analyze some of that data. And so they've, last year and will continue to help us jointly produce the report card. Starting this spring, we began to solicit a lot of feedback via surveys and focus groups about how effective the report card was in meeting the needs of different stakeholder groups. So we'll share that information with you today. We also, this past spring, revised the data collection guidance. So one of the pieces of feedback that we had received, both in these surveys and focus groups, as well as just anecdotal conversations with our ed prep programs, is that there was some room for improvement in the guidance on data collection that was sent out to programs. So we'll talk a little bit more about that later, but we have worked to try to clarify some of that guidance. Over the summer, we will, as I mentioned before, continue to have these updates about our redesign process. We'll also share some information later on in this webinar about a vendor that we've selected to work with us on production of the report card. And we'll also share a little bit more information about this advisory council that we're convening to advise the State Board of Education staff on some of the key decision points for the report card. Finally, all of this work to redesign the report card is leading up to November 1, 2016 release of the redesigned report card. We'll also be working throughout the fall to conduct a lot of outreach to all of the key audience groups for the report card. As I mentioned before, and one of the themes you'll hear throughout our conversation today is our desire to really get the word out about this report card and to get it into the hands of many different stakeholders across the state. So we'll be doing a lot of outreach on that. And while our main focus of the conversation today is really around the 2016 report card and the redesign process for this year, we know that this is iterative work and we want to continue our commitment to collecting a lot of feedback. So we'll be reviewing feedback about the redesigned report card once it's released, as well as looking at some of the usage statistics that we're able to gather from the website release of the report card. And all of that information will be used to further refine revisions or additions that need to take place for the 2017 release. So I hope that served as some helpful background and context for those of you who might not be quite as familiar with the report card. One of the things I want to highlight here on this slide is that Tennessee has been a leader in the reporting on teacher preparation program data. And our report card, as you probably saw in those last couple of timeline slides, since its inception in 2008 and its continued production has looked relatively the same. We know that this is kind of a natural point in time for us to start thinking about a redesign process. We're several years into creating the report card in its current format, and it's time I think to take a step back and to look at things holistically and have a statewide conversation about how we can improve the structure and usage of the report card. This also is an important time, I think, to consider a redesign process for some of the reasons that are on the slide. So back in 2014, the State Board of Education passed a new policy regarding educator preparation. And that policy has also helped to lay some groundwork for this redesign process. Previously, the report card was one of few sources for educator preparation providers to receive detailed information about the performance of their completers once they left their ed prep program. And while it's been helpful for educator preparation programs to receive that kind of detailed information via the report card, providing that really detailed, granular information made it difficult for other stakeholders to access the report card and to find the information presented on it to be user-friendly or helpful. So now, since the 2014 policy on educator preparation has passed the state board, as I mentioned before, it kind of lays the groundwork to think about the report card in a new way. And the key reason for that is the development of what you see on the right-hand side of your screen, a series of annual reports. So annual reports are now going to be the place where educator preparation providers can find detailed information, even at the program level, so for their elementary program or their secondary math program. So it's going to be really granular data that's really focused towards specifically that educator preparation provider audience, and will be used as a part of the program approval process. What that really does is allows us to free up the report card and to think about it in a new and different way. It allows us to kind of take the information that has been previously presented on the report card and really gear it towards a different audience. So that's the reason for the inclusion of and focus on reaching out to districts, reaching out to prospective and current educator preparation candidates, is that we now want to take this opportunity with the report card to design something that's going to be a little bit more high level, that's going to provide kind of a consumer-friendly structure so that other stakeholders can use this information to factor into decisions that they may make around programs to attend, programs to partner with, or just to inform kind of further information about the partnerships they already have in place with educator preparation programs. And so that key shift in audiences really necessitates our redesign process. And so that's why we've been kind of traveling throughout the state, soliciting feedback, and are hosting these webinars is to make sure that as we embark on this redesign process, we're really trying to meet the needs of a new audience for this report card. So with that, one of the things that we've wanted to do throughout this process is really be committed to gathering feedback. And so I'm going to turn things over to Spencer Glosdick on our team to talk a little bit about the mechanisms we've used to solicit feedback and a little bit about what we've heard.
Good morning, everybody. So as Laura said, this spring was really the start of our efforts to seriously engage with the stakeholders of the report card and to solicit some feedback on both the current version of the report card as well as our ideas for the future. And so we've done this through kind of two major efforts, the first of which was a survey that we sent out, and sort of sent out to the same groups that Laura was discussing. We contacted representatives from school districts, from our educator preparation providers, and we also reached out to some current candidates. And this allowed us to kind of get a wide range of feedback about the report card and ask some questions that we had some ideas about but wanted both confirmation about as well as potentially new ideas about the report card. And in addition to the survey, we also held a series of focus groups across the state, and this included these same three groups of stakeholders. And so these are sort of the efforts that we've taken so far, but as Laura mentioned, we're going to continue to be soliciting feedback throughout the summer and leading up to the launch of the report card. And we also hope to conduct some intensive follow-up analysis after the launch of the report card on November 1st. So I'd like to start off by talking about what we saw in the survey responses that we collected. In total, we had just over 400 responses, 221 of which were affiliated with EPPs, 80 came from school districts, and 100 were from current prep program candidates. And before anything else, we really wanted to find out whether people actually were familiar with the report card and whether or not they had used it in the past. And what we found was that most of the respondents from EPPs had used it, with 57% of them saying that they had in the past used the report card, compared to just 26% who definitively said that they had not. At the school district level, usage was a little bit lower, with 38% of respondents saying they had used it and 51% saying they had not. However, we really found that this isn't something that candidates have used in the past, as 88% of the current candidates who responded the survey said that they hadn't used the report card previously, compared to just 1% who had. So this wasn't totally unexpected for us, so we also included a question asking the people who hadn't used the report card before why this was. So across the 3 stakeholder groups, the most common response was that most people just weren't aware of the report card at all. This was the case for 90% of candidates, 51% of district representatives, and 38% of EPP respondents. Another popular answer was that people at all 3 levels weren't really sure how to access the report card, with 45% of district respondents, or EPP respondents saying this was the case, 40% of district respondents, and 27% of the candidates. And then finally, we also found that a particularly high percentage of the candidate respondents didn't think that the information that was included in the report card was helpful, with 23% of them saying that this was the case. So in addition to asking about usage, we also wanted to ask about the content of the report card and what people felt should be included or would be helpful for them to have included in the report card. So we asked one particular question about which of a list of data elements would be most valuable to include on future versions of the report card. And this list included such things as satisfaction data from employers of recent completers, observation data on these completers, assessment data, value-added data, information on the selectivity of the program that they came from, retention data, placement information, and the GPA of these students. And across the 3 groups, the one common response was satisfaction data from employers of recent completers, with 31% of district respondents saying that this would be the most valuable data element to include, 55% of EPP respondents, and 30% of the current candidates. In addition, observation and assessment data was also highlighted by multiple groups, and value-added data and placement information also received a good amount of support. And then in conjunction with this question, we also asked people to respond individually what they felt would be most helpful to include of the data that we haven't reported on in the past. And so a lot of people kind of talked about different facets of the student teaching experience as something that they would want to hear more about, with candidates and districts in particular wondering about like the number of clinical hours that students had in their student teaching experience, what kind of schools students were placed at, and where these schools were. And then in addition, there was a lot of interest in retention information. Some of this was from the districts, some of this was from candidates, and some of this was also from the EPPs who were wondering whether the teachers who they did place were retained in their hiring district, as well as some people who were interested in finding out whether students were retained at their schools over a more extended period of time than what we reported on in the past. And then in addition to this, there was kind of a combination of quantitative data pieces that people felt would be helpful to include, such as observation data, satisfaction data, as we mentioned before, as well as EdTPA scores. And so while the survey gave us an opportunity to kind of collect a wide range of feedback, we also wanted to get some more in-depth feedback on a few questions about the report card. So we held focus groups for these same 3 groups of stakeholders across the state. In all, we had 4 days of focus group sessions. In West, Middle, and East Tennessee, we had separate sessions for district stakeholders, EPP stakeholders, and current candidates. And then on a 4th separate day, we also had an opportunity for some of our partner organizations and other relevant stakeholders in the education world to kind of give their feedback on the report card. And in these focus groups, we asked a similar series of questions as we asked in the survey, but we also provided people the opportunity to give feedback on 2 sample report cards that we had found from other places that were interested in evaluating their teacher prep candidates and their programs. And so in total, across all of our sessions, we had 67 participants in these focus groups, and there was generally a pretty good mix between stakeholders from EPPs, from school districts, and from current candidates, as well as a few partners who attended that focus group as well. One of the first things that we asked people was kind of what positives they saw in the report card and what they liked about the information that was being included already. And in general, people had some positive things to say about the report card in all of these groups, even if sometimes they would have preferred that the information was presented a bit differently. sort of the aggregate response that we got was that people appreciated having one source to look at all of this information about their completers, and in particular like being able to see completers' academic information and outcomes and effectiveness data all in kind of one place. But there were different responses from stakeholders at the 3 different levels that keyed in on different parts of the report card that they felt were useful to people coming from their backgrounds. So district representatives really appreciated having the TVOS information included in there and felt that it allowed them to compare across programs better than other types of information that they had access to. EPP staff generally liked having such information as a full demographic breakdown of their completers in one easily accessible place. And current students generally tended to appreciate the sections on teacher retention as well as the initial license types awarded by providers more than the other parts of the report card. And then the partners also acknowledged that both TVOS and retention information were likely important pieces to include in the report card, which reflects kind of what we've had laid out in the statute already. So after we asked people what they liked about the report card, we also wanted to ask them about some of the negatives they saw in the current version of the report card. And in general, people did have a lot that they wanted to see change about the report card or didn't think was being reported as well as it could be. And so a few of the key themes that we identified were that people didn't feel that some of the data included in the report card is really correlated to effective teaching. In particular, information such as high school GPA, ACT scores, and even some people said undergraduate GPA doesn't really line up with what districts and EPPs themselves have seen to be related to the teachers who go on to succeed in the classroom. Additionally, there was a lot of questions about the way that some of the information was presented, and a lot of people felt that certain sections were unclear. In particular, the TVOS section with its pluses and minuses representing statistical significance confused a lot of people, and a lot of people felt that the information there was kind of lost in the way that it was being presented. And then finally, some people felt that the report card wasn't really giving a full reflection of the providers or the students that they had completing. So in particular, one concern that came out of the EPP focus group sessions that we held was that out-of-state completers and those who go on to teach at private schools are not being included in the current report card, and they felt that this contributed to generally an unfair evaluation of what they're doing as a provider. And then the other main theme that we identified was that people felt that the report card in general kind of needed some clear explanations. So some of the educational terms, people felt that someone who wasn't an expert in education wouldn't have a clear understanding of what exactly some of the terms meant. Some of the data metrics people felt weren't explained very well, so they couldn't really see what different sections were trying to say. And then tying back to this last point from the previous section, people weren't sure who exactly was being represented by the report card, so they were hoping that clearer cohort definitions for each of the metrics and overall would help to clarify exactly who the report card is reporting on. So in addition to that, we also asked participants what they would like to change about the report card or how they would like to do things differently. And in general, the main theme here was that people wanted more detailed information about completers, but felt that the information that was included could definitely be organized better. And so while there was a wide variation in the responses that we got about what exactly people wanted to do differently, I've listed a couple of key themes here on these slides. One of the big things that we got from both districts and EPPs, as well as the current candidates, was that they would like to see some more information about hiring of the completers and things such as average pay or hiring rate at different types of schools or from completers of different programs might be helpful to see. People also wanted kind of a more holistic measure of effectiveness and kind of more measures to see how teachers are having an effect in the classroom. So such things as observation data, more longitudinal evaluation data, and information on either first-time pass rates or average practice scores could be beneficial in addition to the stuff that's already included on the report card for really evaluating the impact that teachers are able to have once they're in schools. And then, as I mentioned before with the survey, there was also a lot of focus on the clinical experiences of completers. with people mentioning such things as the length of the clinical experience, the types of schools student teachers are placed in, and whether or not student teachers are hired at the schools they're placed at or in the same district, as kind of key metrics that we could include that would provide some more detail on this front. And then a final thing that people noted was that they'd like to see a little bit more qualitative information on the report card. So a lot of people mentioned wanting a little bit more detail about the programs, such as when they start, what's the background of the faculty, and then some students talked about it, saying that it would be helpful to know whether you could work while you're doing the program or not. But people also wanted information about whether these completers go on to assume leadership roles or coach teams and things like that, so that they could get a better picture of whether these programs are producing candidates who go on to be successful in the classroom and in their schools. And then finally, one of the last things that we asked about was what we could do to increase the usage of the report card. So as we saw in the survey, a lot of people either weren't familiar with the report card at all or weren't sure how to access it. So this is definitely something that we wanted to change. And one of the big suggestions here was just that we needed to make the report card more user-friendly. So we needed to include some of those explanations that people talked about. We needed to present the data in a way that was a little bit more clear. And we needed to include data that we were really sure tells the story that we want it to about how these programs are performing. And then in addition, people were on board with the suggestion of sending the report card to a larger audience and in general trying to raise awareness about it, which would get at kind of the general lack of knowledge of the report card and awareness of it. And then finally, people felt that creating a clearer purpose for the report card would help to have people understand it better and feel like they know what the purpose of it is. So one particular suggestion that came from both EPP stakeholders as well as those at the district level was that we could work to elevate the partnerships that are already occurring between EPPs and districts and help them to find a way to combine to use this information in a way that's helpful to both of them. So taken together, these suggestions really give us a roadmap for what we can do differently. And even though we won't be able to take all of these suggestions into account, we've really appreciated hearing all these different perspectives on how we can make the report card better going forward.
So we know that was a lot of information about some of the feedback that we received, and one of the things that we'll be doing as a follow-up to this webinar here in the coming weeks is sending out a comprehensive report from that feedback. So while Spencer presented a lot of information, we actually have more information to share about what we learned during these conversations. And so you can expect to receive, and we'll post on our teacher preparation report card site on the State Board of Education website, a copy of that stakeholder feedback report later on, probably later on this month or in early August, that will be available. So those conversations, just to highlight again, have been, to our knowledge, kind of the first time that really comprehensive feedback has been collected about the report card. And they've been incredibly informative as we've thought as a team about what are our goals for this 2016 report card. Are we thinking about moving in the right direction? And giving us also additional areas to think about. So as I mentioned before, one of our key goals is really thinking about how do we make this report card something that is more user-friendly for a variety of different stakeholders. We know that there's great work out there happening in the field about partnerships between educator preparation providers and local districts, and we want to make sure that we're creating a tool that can help to elevate those partnerships, as we mentioned on the last slide, by providing some key data points on kind of some of the most impactful metrics. That's our goal throughout this process. So based on the feedback, as I mentioned, that we just collected, as well as kind of the shift in the redesign that we're hoping to achieve, we sat down as a team and drafted several goals for what we hope to accomplish in this redesign process, and just want to spend some time right now sharing those with you. So a few of these words you've probably heard throughout the feedback that we received through surveys and through focus groups, and you've probably heard me say numerous times already, and I think they will continue to be kind of the buzzwords as we continue through this redesign process. And first and foremost of that really is user-friendly. We've heard loud and clear that the report card in its current form while it does some things really well in terms of providing lots of detailed information, it doesn't necessarily do that in a way that is really user-friendly and that's clear and well organized. So that's one of our directions moving forward, is to really think critically about the format of the report card and putting ourselves in a place of an audience that maybe is not familiar with all of the terms and all of the detailed information, and making sure that we can really understand and use the report card, and that it truly is user-friendly and focused on a general audience. We also have heard this kind of word focused over and over again. So we want to hone in on the most impactful pieces of information. We know that while providing lots and lots and lots of data is really helpful for some stakeholders, it's also not helpful for other stakeholders in that more general audience that we're trying to achieve with this redesigned report card. So we know that educator preparation providers definitely want lots of really detailed, granular information about their completers, and we think that the annual reports are really going to be able to provide that, which means that with the report card, we really want to take on the challenge of being more focused and honing in on those pieces that are going to be, as I mentioned before, most impactful. So our motto in all of this work as it pertains to this goal really is less is more. We want to strip back some of the extraneous information that has been presented in the past and really focus on those things that we think are going to be most useful. Thirdly, informative is kind of one of our key words in our goals. We want to make sure, as I mentioned before, that we're really putting forth information that's going to help EPPs and districts really elevate their partnerships, that's going to help prospective candidates make, informed decisions about where they choose to perhaps attend, get their educator preparation coursework from. So we want to make, our goal here is to support strategic decision making and make sure that we have informative and useful information presented on the report card. And then finally, accessible. You've heard me mention numerous times our goal to expand the audience of this report card, and so that's obviously in the forefront of our mind with all of the decisions that we're making, and I think is embedded in each of these, preceding goals as well. So a little bit about what this means for us as a team. And just want to share this in the spirit of transparency. So we're committed to conducting a really comprehensive redesign process. Our team has devoted significant resources to this project, and we have done and will continue to do thorough research on looking at other report card models, looking at data metrics, and so want to just communicate to you our commitment to be as comprehensive as possible in this process. We also have had a goal of ensuring a high-quality data collection. So those of you who are ed prep providers saw some significant changes in the data collection process for this year, and we believe that those changes really improved the clarity of the data collection, as well as improved kind of the data on the back end that was collected through that process. So we're excited about that change and have already been thinking through some ways to further refine that process for next year and to continue to try to make that process as easy as possible for all involved. Finally, this webinar, I think, is an example, and the focus groups and surveys that we've just shared are an example of our commitment to continue to solicit and incorporate stakeholder feedback throughout this process. And then finally, a couple of other notes here about our work and things that we're focused on are, as we mentioned before in the preceding slide, reporting on the most impactful elements in that user-friendly format, and then finding a way to make sure that the ultimate end product really serves to highlight high-quality programs. And then embedded within all of this is our commitment to listening and learning from all stakeholders. We know that the redesign process and relaunch of the report card in 2016 is going to be a major step forward, but we also know that it's not going to be perfect. And so that's why this really is an iterative process. We're going to continue to depend on your constructive feedback and ideas and solutions, not only throughout the rest of the summer and this fall as we redesign for 2016, but also after we relaunch and we start to collect feedback and think about how to refine our approach for 2017. We're going to depend on that feedback and your ideas and suggestions. So based on the goals and the feedback and the research that we've done, and we've identified a couple of characteristics that we think are going to be really important to integrate into the new report card. And so some of these will seem a little bit repetitive from information that we've mentioned, but I just want to make sure that we display them and talk about them because these really are our kind of guiding characteristics or our guiding principles as we move through the redesign process. So first and foremost is really our commitment to provide at-a-glance information about provider quality. We really think that this is going to help us deliver on the promise and the goal to be more of a user-friendly report card. And so one of the things we've done is to really think through and to research different types of consumer reports, both within and outside of education, to think about what are some changes we could make in the structure of the report card that are really going to be helpful at providing information on provider quality. The second piece is clear identification of strengths and challenges through a performance framework. So as we research different types of consumer reports and report cards, one of the things that really kind of rose to the top amongst all that research was this element of a performance framework. And so that's one of the things that you'll see, that we hope that you'll notice and see in this redesigned report card. Third, and this is something I mentioned before on that slide that highlighted the interplay between the report card and annual reports, but we know that a lot of work has been done through the districts and educator preparation providers who serve on the implementation working groups that have been putting together a lot of work around the development of the annual reports. And so we want to build off of that work and make sure that we've got continuity of data between the report card and annual reports. While these are different tools geared towards slightly different audiences, we want to make sure that they are telling similar stories between the two different types of reports. And then finally, throughout all of this work, we hope that what you'll see in the redesigned report card is a real commitment to data quality and transparency. You heard concerns about that data quality and transparency when Spencer was talking about some of the feedback we received in the focus groups in the survey. And so it's our goal to be able to provide really clear information about who is and who is not included in any particular metric that you see on the report card, and to ensure that we have clear documentation around all of the business rules for the different calculations of data that you'll see presented on the report card. One of the things I also wanted to share with you all is that our staff has convened an advisory council to help advise on some of the key decision points throughout the redesign process. So we'll continue, obviously, to solicit feedback broadly through mechanisms like these webinars that we'll hold over the summer, and you are always free to email myself or Spencer with any questions or concerns or feedback that you have on a particular element or just the report card in general. But we wanted to create this advisory council given that this redesign process is going to contain lots of different decision points, and we wanted to make sure we had a representative stakeholder group who could serve to kind of counsel and advise us on key decision points. So you'll see that this council represents lots of different key stakeholder groups. We've got a variety of representatives from different types of educator preparation providers, different sizes and different structures of those programs. We also have several different representatives from districts, different sizes of districts, as well as representatives from this advocacy community at large. So we've got a state board member on here, as well as representatives from several other advocacy groups throughout the state. So based on the characteristics that we outlined 2 slides ago, what we have done in our research to look at different consumer reports is that we found a sample of a report card that we think represents a strong example of the characteristics that we previously identified. So here's an example of that report card. So we think that this really exemplifies the consumer report orientedness. It's got a performance framework, and it really helps to highlight our goal of data transparency. So our research, as I mentioned before, is what kind of led us to this report card. So this is a visual example of some of the work that's been done in Delaware for their educator preparation scorecards is what they call them in that state. So I think what you can see in this sample is a clear and easy to read report card that provides information quickly for users about program quality. It also provides some at-a-glance information at the top. You can see an overall tier rating for the program. And then it gets slightly more detailed as you look to the rows below that. So you can see information that says recruitment, candidate performance, placement, etc. And so it delves deeper into a few specific areas, which I think ultimately allows different stakeholders to focus on the measures that they care about most. So for example, if you're a district, you might really care about candidate performance as the most significant piece of information that you're interested in. But if you're a prospective candidate, you might be really honed in on placement, and that might be an area where you want to see specific information. So we think that this really sets up a structure that, once again, provides that user-friendly format and allows people to see at-a-glance information about program quality, which are some of our goals in this redesign process. I do want to say just a caution in looking at this example, and the reason that we say sample is that while we think that this presents a strong example of the direction that we hope to move in, this is not necessarily the way that our redesigned report card will look. In particular, the things that you see here, like the language like tier, or some of the particular categories like recruitment, candidate performance, graduate performance, etc., might not be the direction that we'll necessarily go in, but we did want to provide this example of kind of a general structure and kind of visual appeal that we think exemplifies the characteristics that we've identified. Here's an example of a subsequent page of that sample report card. So you can see the information here gets slightly more granular, but it still doesn't get too far into the weeds. So you can see for a specific data element like retention, that's composed up of 2 particular metrics and allows you to see kind of the performance framework structure of this report card, where programs in this case earn specific point values for each of the specific data metrics, which then factors into their overall score on the retention category, as well as then ultimately their overall tier ranking on this report card. So once again, these are not the specific data metrics that we necessarily plan to use. This is more just information to get an idea of the direction and the structure that we hope to move in. And just as another kind of clarifying point, so that was one of the sample report cards that we shared at our focus groups and received feedback upon. And generally, I think of the 2 different report cards that we shared in that focus group, that was the structure and the format that received the most positive feedback. But once again, we're continued to be open to feedback or other ideas that you have as we move through this process. One other update we wanted to provide is just that we have selected a report card vendor to work with us throughout this work. That company's name is Timbo. They have extensive experience in data visualization. We know to make a user-friendly, consumer-friendly report card, we've got to be really thoughtful about how we display our data, and so that was one of the qualifications that we were really seeking in a vendor on this, is someone who could, as the graphic says on the screen, really bring our data to life. They also have extensive experience in designing school and district level report cards, so they're familiar with the idea of a performance framework and how to structure and sequence things. And then finally, they've been a leader in developing reporting tools on educator preparation. So the example that we just shared from Delaware's work was done by Timbo. A little bit more about where we currently are. So we are in the process of identifying the specific elements and metrics that we want to include in our Tennessee-specific report card. So a few of the kind of key pieces that we've been thinking through is the request that we received through many of the different survey and focus group pieces around some more qualitative information on programs. So we're planning to include a profile page that allows the option for providers to submit a description of their program, information about the leadership of their program, as well as some basic demographic and program characteristics. So if you have any specific suggestions about other information that would be helpful for that profile page, please feel free to send us that feedback. In the coming months, we'll be putting together a template to send all providers for them to complete that profile, the information that will ultimately populate that profile. One of the other things that we plan to include as an element in this year's report card and then ongoing, and this is also a piece that we heard loud and clear from the focus group and survey feedback, particularly from EPPs, was the idea of having multiple years of cohort data be included in a single report card. And so that's something that we're planning to incorporate. Eventually, where we hope to be is having 3 years of cohort data included on each report card. For this 2016 report card, we'll just have 2 cohort years. The 2013-14 and 2014-15 program completers will be included, and then we'll grow to 3 years over time. One other piece of information just to highlight your attention to is that all of the information for the 2016 report card is going to be provided at the provider level. Program level information, so secondary math or secondary science or an elementary or special ed program, that kind of program level detailed information will be provided on annual reports. One kind of question that we'd love feedback on is that while I mentioned we're going to keep things at the provider level for 2016, and we'll never be at a place where we have information on every individual program, we are kind of curious about whether or not it would be useful to have a couple different categories of programs have a report card. So for example, would it be helpful to have a report card for UT's elementary program? Would it be helpful to have a report card for all of UT's secondary programs rather than just one overall report card for UT? So a question to ponder and feedback. If you have feedback on that, we'd like to receive it. And then finally, just to continue to reiterate that we're prioritizing data consistency between the metrics that are planned to be used on the annual reports as well as those we would use on the report card. We know that a lot of thoughtful work has been done to develop some of those metrics, and as much as possible, we plan to use those on the report card as well. One kind of final piece before we move into the closing that we'd love to solicit some feedback on. So currently what you see on the screen here are the data pieces that we're considering for inclusion in this year's report card. So you'll see 4 different domains of data. We've got a cohort profile, which we anticipate would contain information about completers' academic backgrounds, completer demographics, as well as assessment data, things like praxis in that category. A domain 2 regarding employment information, so placement and retention data. There's a domain 3 that's listed up here in red around satisfaction. That's data that we eventually plan to use in the report card, but we know that we will not have available for the 2016 release regarding completer and employer satisfaction. And then finally, a 4th domain around program impact, which we anticipate would include TVOS and observation data. So at this point in our redesign process and our planning process, we'd love to collect feedback on these particular domains and data elements. And kind of our chief question for you are, do these look like the right pieces, and are we missing anything significant here? And then within each of these, for example, academic background, do you have strong feelings or thoughts about the specific metrics that should be included within academic background? So for example, should we include information about high school GPA, the major GPA, the ACT scores, praxis scores, for example? What should be included within specific pieces? And as I charge you with kind of that question and that place where we'd like to receive some feedback, I would just ask that you keep in mind our goals of this redesign process and submitting that feedback. So while we want thorough and informative information, we also know one of our goals is less is more, and we want to make sure that this is easy to understand information. We also, as I've mentioned, are going to be providing these report cards at the provider level, so we need to make sure that any data that we include can be applied consistently, across all providers. And then keeping in mind along the less is more line that the really granular, really specific data is going to be provided on the annual report. But I'll just leave this slide up here for just another minute or two so you can make some notes, and we'll post a PDF of these slides along with the recording of the webinar if you'd like to go back and look at them. And once again, we'll just kind of highlight that this is a key area where we'd like to receive your feedback around these domains. Do they look like the right information? Does anything significant look missing. And then finally, in closing, just want to reiterate again that we really appreciate you logging on and attending the webinar today. We appreciate your continued feedback and interest in this redesigned report card. A couple of next steps to highlight for you. We plan to publish a complete report, as I mentioned before, on the stakeholder feedback that we received. We'll also be notifying stakeholders of the next webinar date, so we're working to identify the next point in time when we'll have some additional pieces to bring to you for both updates as well as continued feedback. I also mentioned that we'll be within the next month sending providers templates that will request some of that profile page information, including a program description from you. And then finally, we'll also be posting a copy of these slides and a link to the recording on the following site. That's our teacher prep report card website. So I would make a note of that. All of our updates will be posted there. And then finally, in closing, as you have feedback on some of the questions that we presented today, please feel free to direct those to Spencer. He's going to serve as our kind of person to collect all of that feedback. And to any questions you have, we'll also work to get you responses to as well. And then finally, one final note, we'll plan to start including all this information about webinar notices and things in the EPP update that TDOE sends out as well. So additional members of your faculties and districts can access information that way also. So with that, that kind of concludes the information and updates that we have to present to you today. Once again, we thank you for your time and your attendance and look forward to continued conversation and feedback about the redesign process.